18 and verse 22. Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 22. We're going to read one verse this morning. I'm preaching through a series of messages called the Abominations of the Believers. And if you remember, in the first message, we defined what an abomination was. And I explained that there are many things in the Bible that are called abominations. Many of them no longer apply today. Like, for example, eating shrimp was an abomination, but now we can eat whatever we want, and that sort of thing. But there's still quite a list of sins that believers still commit today that are called abominations. So today is kind of one of those blunt, I guess for lack of better terms, direct subjects. We talked about idolatry. We talked about being half-hearted in our worship. But today we're talking about this. So Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 22. If you found your place, please read along with me. After that I'll pray and we'll be seated. Leviticus 18 verse 22. Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination. Father, as we read this, I think everyone in this room is aware that it is speaking of one of the sins that is being promoted today, as if it is something that is normal or right, when we know, as we read the scriptures, that you call it an abomination. But along with that, Lord, just that whole area of sexual impurity, Lord, is a problem in society today. And so I pray, help me to preach it, help me, give me tact, give me sensibility, give me tenderness, brokenness. Give me, Lord, the filling of your Spirit, and give us conviction. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And you may be seated. If someone were to ask me which sins I thought were most promoted in society today, I would say without hesitation, I believe that sexual sins are the most promoted. There's a lot of things that are promoted, but I don't think anything is promoted more than sexual sins today. And you'll have to excuse me, but it's extremely hot, and I got to get rid of this jacket, okay? So, just going to throw that over there. That's not a sin, okay? That's just a cultural thing, so deal with it. We are told today, what are we told? We're told that sex is okay, as long as we're careful, don't get pregnant, don't, do anything foolish, don't get into diseases. If you do that, then it's okay. That's what society tells us. And not only is it okay, but we're also told that any form is okay, because after all, it's a part of your private life and nobody's business anyway. Well, God doesn't share that opinion. If you think that way, I hope that by the end of this message, you'll understand that's not God's opinion. This is not a little thing. This is a big deal. Nudity, sensuality, is around us everywhere. In advertisement and entertainment, you see it everywhere. I'll never forget the day that I became most aware of this. It was shortly after I was saved. I was watching my favorite detective show on TV a long time ago. Big, thick, black and white TV. I was that poor. And there was an advertisement. It took me a while to figure out what the advertisement was for, because all I saw was a very scantily dressed woman. Finally, after 30 seconds, they zoomed in on the watch that they were trying to sell. It's promoted, it's pushed down our throats constantly, every day, in advertisement and entertainment. Almost everything appeals to the lust of your flesh in order to sell the product. No wonder we have such problems with it. Society is saturated with it. It's on our minds all the time. Temptation is all around us, everywhere you look. So let me just start by saying that God is the designer of your body. He gave you those natural urges to procreate. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, if we don't have physical relations, what happens? Well, we pretty much die out as a people. So it's pretty much required if we want to continue to exist, but God has placed certain limits on, or certain barriers, I guess you would say, on physical relations. And when we violate those boundaries, God calls it an abomination. I want to touch on 3 areas this morning. I'm going to do them as quickly and as tactfully as possible, but with a subject like this, it's hard to be tactful, but I'm going to try. But first we're going to talk about the biblical boundaries. What does God's Word say about what you can do and what you cannot do in that particular area of your life? Secondly, we're going to talk about the big one today, homosexuality and transgenderism. And then thirdly, adultery and fornication. We're going to touch on those 3 areas throughout the message. So first of all, let's look at the biblical boundaries that God has given us. One of the aspects of marriage is that it provides an acceptable way for people to handle those natural urges that occur in their life. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 tells us about this. If you'll turn there, we're going to read several verses from this chapter. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, we're going to start in verses 1 and 2. Paul writes, and he says, "Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband." In other words, if it's that big of a struggle to you, it's good for you not to touch a woman. But if you're struggling with that, get married. Get a wife. So there's nothing wrong with physical relationships. In fact, the Bible actually encourages it. Did you know that? Within the proper boundaries. Verses 3 through 5, same chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 3 through 5. "Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence." Do I need to explain that? I hope not. "And likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency." So God actually encourages that in marriage as being something that is good, something that is helpful to your partner. Outside of marriage, however, God calls it sin. Inside of marriage, God calls it holy. Did you know that? Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. Hebrews 13 and verse 4. "Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge." So the Bible says that the bed is undefiled. So what we do in the privacy of our bedroom does not defile the bed, because we are in marriage. And God says it is honorable. Now the Bible defines marriage as being between a husband and a wife. I saw a book, it made me so mad. It was a children's book. The title of the book was, "I Have Two Mommies." I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Written at a 7 or 8 year old level. Ain't nobody got two mommies. Nobody here has two mommies. You got one mommy, you got one daddy. Everyone who has ever lived, except for Jesus and Adam and Eve, has one mommy and one daddy. That's the way it works. I challenge you to find it working any other way. No. One man, one woman. Any other type of union is unbiblical. It is not allowed from a biblical perspective. No matter what society says, it is not normal. It is an abomination. No matter what the government has to say about it, it is not legal. It is an abomination. You say, but it's legal. They passed laws. The Supreme Court said that. I don't care what the Supreme Court. God is higher. And God says it's an abomination. And in case you forgot, that means that God says it makes him sick to his stomach. It loathes him. It stinks. It is abhorrent to him. Not something that we look at and go, well, that's just what they do. That's not my thing, but if that's what they do, that's okay. It is not okay. It's an abomination. It makes God sick. It might tickle the flesh of many people, but it makes God angry. It's an abomination to him. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22. What did it say? Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination. Now I know that some liberal-minded folks out there is going to get upset and start screaming, but that's Old Testament, Pastor. We don't live in the Old Testament time anymore. We don't have to do all that Old Testament stuff anymore. But the same crowd never complains if we use the Old Testament when we're speaking of murder, or when we're talking about stealing or physical abuse. It's okay to use the Old Testament for that, but this one particular sin, which we want, suddenly we don't want the Old Testament anymore. They reject the parts of God's moral law that speaks of purity because they don't want purity. The Old Testament sacrifice and dietary laws have changed. I get it. I understand. But God's moral law has never changed. Never. If God said it was morally wrong, then it's morally wrong. He hasn't changed his mind. He's not going to. He's a holy God. He sets the standard. We might not agree. We might not like it. We might want to ignore it. We may very well even disobey it, but we cannot change it. It's God's law. Do you know that the Old Testament law demanded the death penalty for sexual deviancy? Now, moving on to the next point in our outline, I want to talk about homosexuality and along with that, transgendered whatever, okay? Because it's the same thing. It really is. The Old Testament law demanded death penalty for sexual deviancy. Now, I'm not advocating the death sentence. I'm not saying go out and find somebody that's a homosexual and kill them. I'm not saying that. I want to say unequivocally that I am not saying that we as individuals should kill people that are gay. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that God took it really serious. It certainly gives you an understanding of just how serious God views sins like this. In the Old Testament law, if you stole a loaf of bread, do you know what would happen to you? Well, you would have to pay back fivefold. You'd have to make some sort of retribution for your sin of stealing a loaf of bread. And if you were hungry, they kind of cut you a little slack. The sin of adultery, the sin of fornication, the sin of homosexuality, you died for that. So don't tell me that sin is just sin. It's not. God never said that. All sin is bad, but some sins are worse. We do that in the same on earthly terms. You can walk up to me and you can say, Pastor, I think your tie is just horrible and ugly. And I would be slightly upset with you because after all, my wife got me this tie. And I like it. And I don't like you anymore. But I still like my tie. Or you can walk up and punch me in the nose. And I guarantee you, I would rather you mention my tie being ugly before you punch me in the nose. We don't view sin the same, so why do we suddenly say God does? Because He doesn't. Oh yes, you die without Jesus Christ, you're going to hell. Doesn't matter what sin it is. It could be one of the little ones or one of the big ones. Doesn't matter. Without Christ, we are doomed to a devil's hell. But the fact is, God very clearly says there's different penalties for different sins. All sin is not the same. Some sins God calls an abomination. And this is one of them. This sin God calls an abomination. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13. Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 13. If a man also lie with mankind, as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. The government has no right to pass a law that allows what God says the penalty should be death. The government has no right to say it's okay. we should still have laws against that. We don't, as individuals, have the right to go out and kill people. We don't have that right. But the government has been given the authority, according to God's Word, to make laws to govern our nation. One of those laws should be sexual purity. But we got away from that a long time ago. A long time ago. But God demanded the death penalty for numerous forms of sexual sins. But there's one sin, well, there's a couple actually, which he defines as an abomination. The sin of homosexuality being one of them. Now there's promiscuity, and then there's gross sin. This one is more than just promiscuity. It is a deviancy, a decadence at another level that is far beyond simply playing the field, if you will. Turn to Romans chapter 1. According to Romans chapter 1, there can come a point when a man has been so selfish, so self-centered, to the point of self-worship, that God will actually lift his hand from off of him. And it is at that point where that man, no longer hindered by the Spirit of God, where he steps a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper into degradation. Notice this, Romans chapter 1, verses 24 through 27. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness, to the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Let me pause there for a moment. What we see up to this point in the book of Romans is where man did not want to think about his Creator, where man did not want to worship and serve his Creator, where man did not like to retain God in his knowledge, and so he made himself his own gods. And then the Bible says, wherefore God gave them up. Because they would not worship God, after a while God stopped striving with them. He gave them up. And then in verse 24, we're told when he gave them up to uncleanness, this is what he gave them up to. Verse 25, it says, who changed the truth of God into a lie, worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. Do not tell me, do not try to tell me that in the Old Testament it was bad, but in the New Testament it's okay, because it's not. Clearly the New Testament condemns sexual deviancy. Look, I get a little tired of these, I don't know what word I should use, this pansy attitude that I keep hearing in religious circles nowadays. Love them anyway. What makes their sin any less sinful than your sin? Look, God hates all sin, but he does not call every sin an abomination. We need to get this in our minds. Some sins God really hates. Turn to Deuteronomy 22, verse 5. There's one more verse concerning this that I want to bring up, simply because so many preachers misapply it. And I want you to pay careful attention to what this verse says, because it's been misapplied so often. In my younger years as a Christian, I actually misunderstood this verse because it was taught to me wrong, because I didn't think for myself. Deuteronomy 22, verse 5. The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are abomination unto the Lord thy God. To summarize, what does it say? It says a man shouldn't wear woman's clothes and a woman shouldn't wear man's clothes. God says it's an abomination. That's what the verse says. What's it talking about? Cross-dressing. Transgenderism. That's what it's talking about. It's not talking about women wearing pants or Scottish men wearing kilts. It's talking about this particular sin. And God says it's an abomination. It's wrong. And it's very pertinent to our discussion. Unfortunately, since it's been so misapplied, a lot of people don't quite make the connection. Men in women's clothes and women in men's clothes. And as much as some preachers want to make it say women should not wear pants, that's not what it really is talking about. The verse is talking about a person who is trying to pass themselves off as the opposite gender. I don't know how they do that. Simple DNA test. That's all it takes. Now, I've seen comedians on TV, and especially when I was younger. When I was younger, it wasn't in society in America like it is now. When I was younger, comedians would come out dressed up as a woman. Milton Berle, who you probably don't even know the name, I think he might have been one of the first ones. He'd come out dressed like a woman with lipstick on, and everybody would laugh, and it was funny. Then there was another guy, his name was Flip Wilson. He would come out and dressed up like Geraldine Jones, and he would walk around, shaking his hips and saying, "The devil made me do it." And everybody would laugh, and it was funny. But it wasn't funny. It's not funny. For me personally, I think that's getting just a little bit too close. I think God made us a certain way. I see musicians nowadays. I've seen musical groups. I couldn't tell you if they're men or women. I don't know. You got to do a little research. You got to read something. You got to read their name. And if it says Bob, it's probably a guy, right? But if you look at them, you don't know. There's such a blurring today. You can't see a guy. You can't see a girl. Men walking around with pants so tight you can count the coins in their pockets. It's embarrassing, unbelievable. And you go, what's going on? The devil has been blurring the lines for a long time. And now we're supposed to think it's okay. Gender reassignment surgery. You know what? Take a look at the DNA. And you might be able to change your clothes. You might be able to get all kinds of plastic put all over your body. But at the end of the day, 1,000 years from now, when the archaeologist digs your body up out of the ground, he's going to look at your hip bones and he's going to say, that is a man. Don't ask me why he's got all those plastic bags all over his body, but he's a man. They'll check the DNA or the bone marrow and they'll say, that is a woman. They'll know because you can't change your DNA. You can't. You will forever be whatever you were born as. If anybody comes to church looking different next week, I'll be shocked. But you can't change what God made you. You just can't. It's wrong. God says it's an abomination. He despises it. He abhors it. He says it's repulsive. It is filthy. It is detestable. He cannot tolerate it. It is an abomination. No matter how politically correct we may try to be, the Bible is pretty clear, and that's what your guide is, Christian. The gay crowd likes to say Jesus never spoke out against homosexuality. I've heard that. We had a guy here years ago, he got saved. He got saved out of that. He was separating from that kind of life. And his gay friends told him, it's okay. Jesus never preached against homosexuality. Really? You want to go there? I could just as easily say Jesus never spoke out against incest or bestiality. But nobody argues that those sins are abominable. But this one somehow, it's okay. Right? So having said that, let's see what Jesus really had to say. What did Jesus say? And I want to look at a passage from the Gospels where Jesus talks about sodomy, because the city Sodom, where, as I said, it's pretty obvious that their sin is homosexuality. Now, if you don't want to believe that their sin was homosexuality, then you're going to obviously have to reinterpret the words of Christ. But this is what I believe the Scriptures to teach. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 23 and 24, Jesus makes it clear. Matthew 11, 23 and 24, Jesus makes it clear homosexuals can repent if they want to. Matthew 11, 23 and 24, and thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven, shall be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, the city of homosexuals, it would have remained unto this day. But I say unto you, that it shall be more tolerable in the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee. So Jesus said that Sodom, if they would have received the same preaching that Capernaum had received, they would have repented. But they didn't. They could have. It was possible, but they didn't. It is not that a homosexual has gone too far. They haven't. They can be saved. And many do get saved. According to the context of the passage, Jesus was speaking of repentance, and he said Sodom would have repented. Now go to Luke chapter 17, verses 28 through 30. Likewise also, as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. I want you to think about this. God looked down upon planet Earth, and he didn't go, wow, look at Capernaum. Those people over there keep stealing their neighbors' lawnmowers. I'm going to rain fire and brimstone on them. He never did that. God never looked down and he said, wow, look at Tyre and Sidon. Man, those people are materialistic. Boy, they love money. Boy, they worship false gods. I got a great idea. I'm going to rain fire and brimstone down upon them and destroy them. God never did that. But God looked down at Sodom and Gomorrah, and he saw their sin was so great that he destroyed the cities. And you read it back in the book of Genesis. You cannot escape. Their sin was definitely the sin of homosexuality. And God said it was so great that he destroyed the cities because of it. Don't tell me that he thinks every sin is the same, because he doesn't. You can make a couple of observations from the passage. First, the Sodomites were more concerned about living in this life than they were about God's judgment, and that is true for many sinners today. Second, you could expect the world to have the same attitude. Jesus said it's going to be like that, and it is. We're here. I believe we're living in the end times, and I'm not surprised that we're seeing that attitude in society today. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like to be different. I don't. I don't like to be the oddball. I don't like to be the outcast. But I would rather have an offended workplace, or an offended family, or an offended church than to have an offended God. God takes it seriously. We should too. On numerous occasions, Jesus condemned the sin of adultery, did he not? Sexual immorality, fornication, these terms describe any type. Now, I want to make this clear because we're going to move into this in just a moment. But these sins, adultery and fornication, are sins because you're moving into an area of sexual impurity outside of marriage. And marriage is defined, historically, marriage has also been defined in every culture, in every country. Wife has always been a woman. Husband has always been a man. The Greek word for wife, by the way, is the word gune, and it's always feminine. It can never be a man. Now, if marriage can only be between a man and a woman, then whatever's going on cannot be constituted marriage. And thus, it is at the very least, fornication and adultery, which Jesus still frequently condemned. Do you follow what I'm saying? Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived. Neither fornicators, we know what that is. Idolaters, check, we understand that. Nor adulterers, great, it's not the same as fornicators, we get it. Nor effeminate. What's effeminate? Effeminate is a guy, a woman cannot be effeminate. God created them feminine already. They're naturally feminine. Now, I've met some ladies that would make me wonder if they were all feminine, but typically they're feminine. So if we find the word effeminate, it is talking about a guy who is intentionally acting like a girl. You know what I'm talking about, big fella? Oh, it hurt my feelings. Well, suck it up, Buttercup. Get over it. You're supposed to be a man. It goes on to say, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. Unfortunately, many people today have made their own opinions and they made their own standards by which they desire to live. But the fact is, it is clearly condemned in the Bible again and again and again. By the way, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I really, no kidding, had to throw away about 2/3 of this message just for the sake of time. There's so much more that could have been said. The fact is, Paul meant exactly what Christians have long thought that he meant. The homosexual behavior is symptomatic of sin in the world, and God says that he hates it. He loathes it. Now let's look at adultery and fornication, because, and I would hope that I'm right, I pray that I'm right, but I really don't know that anyone in this room has any problem with homosexuality or with transgenderism. If you do, repent, get right with God, move on with life. But everyone in this room probably has issues with the sins of adultery and fornication. You say, well, I've never cheated on my wife. I've never done anything like that. No, but maybe you just thought about it. And by the way, Jesus said that, yeah, thinking about it is just as bad as doing it. Okay? Turn to Ezekiel 22:11. While we're talking about sexual deviancy, I want to make sure that we cover these two, adultery and fornication, make sure that they're on the list. Ezekiel 22:11, God said, and one hath committed abomination with his neighbor's wife. Now, it's not talking about them going out and having a cup of coffee. It's not talking about them, leaning on the fence between their two yards and saying, hey, how you doing today, Martha? I'm fine. How are you, John? No. When God says that he's committed abomination with his neighbor's wife, I think you understand what he says. He goes on to say, another hath lewdly defiled his daughter-in-law, and another in thee hath humbled his sister, his father's daughter. It's clearly talking about sexual impurity. Clearly. If you take a good look at it, it's obvious what God's talking about. He puts it in tactful language, but the meaning is clear. And I think we should discuss the difference here between the words fornication and adultery, because they're not the same thing. A lot of people think they are, but they're not. They're mentioned side by side in several passages in the Bible. For example, in Galatians chapter 5, verse 19, it says, now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication. Side by side. They're not the same sin. Paul's not being redundant. He's not saying, now, the works of the flesh are these: sexual impurity and sexual impurity and no. They're different. They're not the same. Just for the sake of time, you can study this out on your own later if you like, but let me just give you the definition. Fornication is sexual sin before marriage, and adultery is sexual sin after marriage. It's pretty simple. Okay? What if I'm single and they're not? What if? Look, don't do either one of them, all right? You're still saved. Don't worry about that, okay? So go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 32. See what Jesus said. Matthew 5, verse 32. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of, what's the word? Oh, nobody's with me. I'll give you a moment. Matthew 5, verse 32. Let's try this again. But I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth what? Adultery. I think the verse is pretty clear. At the time that Jesus said this, the Jews were practicing something that was called a betrothal. And it began when a man and a woman got engaged. And we don't do it this way today. It's kind of a cultural thing. It kind of helps you understand how Jesus could say what he said. Because we don't do it this way today. But during their betrothal period, the man would be getting his house ready, getting his finances in order, maybe getting a decent job so he could actually support more than himself, that sort of thing. He's getting everything ready, and then after he got everything ready, he would go get the bride, and he would take the bride to his father's house, and then there at the father's house, there would be a formal ceremony where the bride was presented to the father, and after that, then the bride and the groom would go to the home that the groom had prepared, and there they would consummate their marriage. At that point, they were considered legally married, and they were allowed to physically consummate their wedding relationship. But at any time during the betrothal period, while he's getting the house ready and she's doing her thing and getting things ready, they're not quite married yet. It's in the betrothal period. But if during that time, if fornication were discovered, then the wedding would be called off. That's basically what Joseph, the husband of Mary, was doing in Matthew chapter 1. If you remember in Matthew 1, it says the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise, when as his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph before they came together. Did that ever catch you a bit odd? I remember reading that from an American perspective. The first time I read it, I said, wait a minute, they were married but they weren't living together? That's weird. Well, yeah, in our culture, that's weird. But in their culture, they were espoused. The promise was made, but they were not living together. They were in their betrothal period. So the Bible says Mary was espoused to Joseph. Before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Ghost. Now, she knew it was of the Holy Ghost, and I'm sure she tried to tell mom and dad that's what was wrong, and I'm pretty sure she tried to tell Joseph that's what was wrong, but nobody's going to believe that story, and Joseph didn't either. I mean, think about it. If you were a dad and your daughter comes up to you and says, guess what, Dad, I'm pregnant. Isn't that wonderful? And God did it. Who's going to believe that, right? Nobody's going to believe that. But this is the situation that Mary was in, and it was true. And verse 19 says, then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away, to divorce her privily. Why? Because, if you took this thing to its full extent, Mary could have been stoned and killed. Because that's what the Old Testament law demanded, and the Jews were still doing it. Remember the woman caught in adultery? They were still doing it. Right? Joseph loved her. He didn't want her to be killed, so he thought about, let's just do this quietly. Let's do this quietly. That's what was going on in his mind. That's what was going on in the life of Joseph and Mary. The Jews saw that betrothal period as being so serious. It was as if it was marriage itself. So if fornication was found, then the groom had to give a writing of divorcement to the bride. The betrothal period was taken that seriously. Today we don't. I got a friend that was engaged 4 times before he actually got married. They don't take it so seriously today, but they did then. Why? Because there's a certain sacredness in marriage. It's a sacredness that brings a measure of honor and respect to a relationship and purity in the bedroom. Now keep that in mind, and remember that there are various punishments laid out in the Old Testament for various sins. But if adultery was found, that was a capital offense. Job called it a heinous crime. That's what Job called it. Jeremiah called it villainy. And God said it's a sin worthy of death. Go to Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 10. And remember, we're not talking about homosexuality now. Now we're just talking about straight up adultery here, okay? Some guy cheating on his wife. Leviticus 20 and verse 10. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. That's what God says. So this particular sin is so emotionally and spiritually destructive. And I think we've lost the sense of that today. We don't think of it in those terms anymore. I'm sorry, honey. It was a moment of weakness. Please forgive me, baby. Please take me back. That would never happen to my mom, I'll tell you that. If I ever did anything, my wife would kill me. She told me when we got married, and I told her, till death do we part. There will be no divorce. I'll kill you first. Don't make the mistake of violating that trust. Would I actually do it? I don't know. But that guy is dead. I'll tell you that. Whoever he may be, he's done, okay? You say, that's not a very spiritual, Pastor. I know it. And I'm not perfect. This particular sin is so emotionally and so spiritually destructive that most courts of law in civilized countries, by the way, they have a special provision for those who take the law into their own hands, and they commit what is called a crime of passion. In other words, if you walk in on your spouse who's cheating on you, you're overcome with rage, you're overcome with anger, you kill the offenders, then the court will lower the offense from murder to manslaughter. Now, you're still going to pay. You still killed somebody. You still got to pay for your crime. But the crime is viewed, and everybody understands this situation, that this is one sin that will push you over the edge. I remember I was in the States a few years ago. My wife and I and my daughter, it's funny that you're here. This illustration's in my notes if you want to see. We're driving down the road. I was sitting in the back because my wife and my daughter, they leave me out of everything. They just sit up there and talk in Korean, and I'm just back there, I'm just sucking my thumb. All right, it's not that bad, okay? But I was sitting in the back. And we're riding along, and this car pulls up beside us. Now, my daughter was driving. She didn't notice. She's just driving. She and Mom are talking. My wife didn't notice. They're just talking. I noticed the car pull up. There's a couple of guys in the car. And they were looking, man. I'm telling you, they were looking and trying to get attention and looking. And I'm in the back, and my blood is boiling. All they're doing is looking, right? They haven't done anything. They haven't honked a horn. They haven't, no whistle, no nothing. They're just looking. And I'm sitting back there going, I wish I had a gun. Now, if I'm going to get that angry when somebody looks at my wife inappropriately, I'm pretty sure I know what would happen if I ever walked in and saw something else going on. That's called a crime of passion. And even the court goes, yeah, what you did was wrong, and you still gotta pay for your crime, but we do understand. It is that sort of sin. Every sin begins in the heart. But this is one of those sins that Jesus brings out in the open to show that the sin in the heart is just as bad as the actual act itself. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 and 28. Jesus said, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery." He's talking about the Old Testament law. This is what the law said. In verse 28, "But I say unto you," and every man in this room, you need to memorize verse 28. Memorize it. Review it. Remind yourself of this. "But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her in his heart." That's what Jesus said. So don't tell me it's okay to window shop as long as you don't buy. It's not okay. All I did was look. That's not all you did. Jesus said you're guilty. You have committed an abominable sin. You didn't just enjoy a second glance. It's not quite that simple. I'll never forget the day when somebody told me it's okay to window shop as long as you don't buy. That's a bunch of garbage. It's not okay. I mean, if my wife were to start staring at another man, do you think I'd say, well, that's okay? I already know if some other guy stares at my wife. I don't think that's okay. How many of y'all are married? Raise your hand. You think it's okay if your spouse is staring at somebody else? And it's not because they got a funny hat on, you know why. You think it's okay? Anybody here think it's okay? Because I'm glad I didn't marry you. If you're a guy, I'm double glad I didn't marry you, right? It's not okay. Some of you like to play around, you know. Some guys that like to play around and flirt around a little bit, you know. You're married, but you think it's okay to flirt. It's not okay. Your wife is not tickled pink over that. She doesn't think it's okay. You might not do anything physically, but you're still just as guilty. Jesus said that. But I say unto you that every man that looketh on a woman to lust after her in his heart, he's already committed adultery in his heart. That's what Jesus said. You're guilty, though you didn't actually do it. You only thought about doing it. You're guilty. May I say that God hates your sexual sin? Whatever it may be, He hates it. He calls it an abomination. He despises it. He abhors it. He says it's repulsive. He says it's filthy. It is detestable. He loathes it. He cannot tolerate it. And do not think for a moment that you will escape God's punishment, Christian, because you won't. Let's all stand, every head bowed, every eye closed. Say, wow, Pastor, that's pretty tough. It's only tough because you know as well as I do it's so prevalent in society, so you think it's tough. But it's really not. Kind of goes along with all the other abominations that God gives us in His Word. If you're a child of God and you have struggled with this or you've done this, you need to repent. You need to get your life right. You say, well, I'm not pure anymore. Well, nobody was ever pure until Jesus saved them and cleansed them. So just get right with God and walk in purity. It's that simple. This is a temptation that you face. And don't lie to me and tell me you don't, because just about everybody does at some point. I'd like to tell you that it gets easier when you get older, but I don't think it does. It's a temptation that everyone faces. You pray to God right now that He'll give you strength to say no to temptation every time it comes. Because when you fall, you're not just falling. You're not just making a mistake. You're committing a horrid sin that God says is an abomination to Him. If we could see that sin the way God does, it would sure help, wouldn't it? As the piano begins to play, if God has spoken to your heart, won't you come? I never really expect a very big response to an altar call when you preach on a sin like this. Because nobody really wants to come forward, because that's almost like saying, I'm guilty. Well, guess what? We're all guilty already. Every one of us are guilty. You were born a sinner and it didn't get any better until you met Jesus. If you got things going on in your heart of this nature, you need to get it right. I read somewhere that scientists wanted to do a test to see what the effect of pornography was. The sad thing was they couldn't find anybody who had never looked at it to be a test group. So don't tell me it's not a problem. Every person in this room knows the temptation. It's natural. God created us that way. That's why we procreate. It's a horrid sin. God doesn't want it in your life. It's destructive to you, destructive to your walk with Christ. It's destructive to society. Paul said, make not the members of Christ members one with members of a harlot. Have you ever read that? He takes it serious. We should too.